Hello everyone friends. On July 13th, 2024, an assassination attempt was made on Donald Trump at an election campaign in Pennsylvania for the 2024 US presidential election. The bullet passed within millimeters of Trump's head. The shooter turned out to be 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, who fired from the roof of a building that was 120 meters from where Trump was speaking. He managed to fire several shots before being killed by a member of a Secret Service counterattack team. A great deal has been said on this topic. I'm going to do that too. And what is most interesting here, it turns out that the murdered US presidents have something in common with Donald Trump. There's something that unites them. What's that? A little background information. The United States of America, like most capitalist countries in the world, is an oligarchic state. In this state, key political decisions are made not by deputies and presidents, but by those who pull the strings behind them. An elementary confirmation of this is that billions of dollars are spent on elections in the United States. This includes various campaign activities, PR campaign, maintenance of election headquarters, and so on. If we talk about the presidential election, Trump and Biden spent about $1 billion each in the last one. If we talk about congressmen and senators, one person spends up to $27 million on an election race. And now let's reason logically. Let's say I'm some American, a smart working engineer of a factory with a salary of $5,000 a month. And here I want to go into politics and honestly serve my state. Where can I get tens of millions of dollars? And by the way, it is not a fact that these tens of millions of dollars will help to win. So I need somewhere to get millions of dollars, which are even more likely to be just wasted. Maybe collect donations from ordinary people. How are they going to find out about me? It is also necessary to turn to the big media, which are also owned by oligarchs. So in any case, oligarchs are behind politicians. Only large businesses have the kind of vast sums that can be spent freely. There are big media, bankers, and transnational companies. And now again, a question for logic. Why do bankers and big companies need to finance politicians, which in fact they actively do? Obviously, so that the people they invest in will make the decisions they want in public office. That's it. Thus, it is obvious that secret power exists. And the United States has the truest plutocracy. That is, power is concentrated in a group of the richest people. Now let's figure out what exactly these oligarchs are that run America. Of course, it is logical to look at the Forbes list of the richest people in America and point to them. But that would be wrong, because there is one company in the United States that creates what other people create their businesses for. It creates money. It is the Federal Reserve System of the United States of America, the organization that prints dollars. Although it has the word federal in its name, it does not belong to the government. To put it simply, it is a private company. Again, this is generally open information. No one hides it. And it is stated on the official website of the Fed. In addition, you can take a US dollar and see what is written on it. It doesn't have the word government banknote on it. When, for example, money was issued by the US state, for example under Lincoln, it was indicated on it that it was state money. The Federal Reserve has a monopoly on printing money, the very dollar. That is, it fulfills the role of the central bank of the United States. And thus it turns out that there is a group of people who have a personal printing press to print money that can be used to buy anything around the world. That is, the US dollar is printed not by the state. What kind of people? Well, here, as they say, is a mystery behind 7 seals. There is only indirect data that the Fed shares belong to the largest banks in the US and Europe, behind which stand from 50 to 300 of the richest families in the world. Notably, the Rothschilds and Rockefellers, who long ago realized that the key to power lies in controlling the money printing monopoly, not political authority. And by the way, it was the Rothschilds who for some time owned the oldest bank, the Bank of England. Now here's the interesting part. Intelligent people know and understand all this perfectly well. They realize that a bunch of people are holding both the United States and the world in debt slavery. That this bunch of people influence politics, that they create crises, wars. What to do in such a situation? It seems to be elementary. Nationalize central banks, including the US Federal Reserve, and transfer the power to print money to the government. And here is the history of some US presidents who wanted to do this. The first of those presidents was Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson used his fight against the US bank for a new election campaign, the slogan of which was "Jackson and no central bank." A strong statement. So Andrew Jackson is the first US president to be assassinated in an assassination attempt. But the assassination attempt failed. The gun misfired and the president survived. But that didn't help America. Jackson must have figured it out, and eventually money was printed by private citizens anyway. The second president, who went a step further and took the dollar issue under the state control, was Abraham Lincoln. In his time, the money was government money and it was labeled as treasury bills. Now it is simply stated that it is Federal Reserve paper. On April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. The assassination took place at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The third president who went against the bankers was James Garfield. Here's what he said about monetary policy. Whoever controls the volume of money in our country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize that this whole system is very easily controlled one way or another by a few powerful people at the top, you don't have to explain where periods of inflation and depression come from. On July 10, 1881, he was shot and died 11 weeks later. And then there's the President of the United States, William McKinley. The gold standard was officially introduced in the USA in 1900 under President McKinley, with the dollar's gold content being established by law. The unlimited issuance was again postponed. So on September 6, 1901, while greeting the peoples of Buffalo, the president was shot twice. A week later, he passed away. And 12 years later, the bankers finally took over, creating the Federal Reserve System that still exists today. The Federal Reserve Act was signed into law by President Woodrow Wilson. And these are the words attributed to him. We've become the most powerless, submissive, and government-controlled society in the civilized world. We are no longer a government of the people's will, nor a government elected by the majority, but a government controlled by a small group of individuals. There is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so complete and so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. But 50 years after the creation of the Fed, another president in the United States tried again to go against the private money printing machine. That was John F. Kennedy. On June 4, 1963, he signed Presidential Directive Number 11110. This directive authorized the U.S. Treasury Department to issue dollar bills backed by silver, to issue U.S. money through the Treasury bypassing the Fed. This money was printed. In essence, Kennedy did the same thing as Lincoln and repeated his fate. John F. Kennedy was ostentatiously executed in full view of the world with a shot to his head. Interesting fact. 5 years after the publication of John F. Kennedy's ill-fated decree, the brother of the shot president, Robert Kennedy, was assassinated exactly the same day, on June 4, 1968. This was just after the younger Kennedy had won the California primary election, which made him a candidate for the presidential election. And clearly, the other candidates had grasped the meaning of this assassination. 4 of the 5 US presidents who went up against private printing machine were assassinated. One survived, but understood everything. After Kennedy, no one dared to go against the US Federal Reserve. No one except Donald Trump. The funny thing is that the Federal Reserve is not even part of the federal government. It is an independent private central bank that was designed by very powerful Wall Street lobbyists a little over 100 years ago. Meanwhile, the Fed has rewarded the US financial system with massive debt, which is eating away at America like a cancer. Moreover, the Fed officials have no accountability to the American people, Trump claimed. And now the cherry on the cake. News from April 2024. The United States of America is discussing Trump's plans to nationalize the Fed. The presidential candidate is going to invade the holy of holies of American monetary policy. The American media are discussing Donald Trump's economic program, some points of which have reportedly come to the attention of the media. The centerpiece of it is plans to limit the independence of the Federal Reserve System, US FRS. This idea has appeared time and again in the writings of economists for decades, but until recently its realization seemed completely impossible. The media also say that Trump had such people as Stephen Moore and Arthur Laffer as economic advisors, among others. The former once called for abandoning the Federal Reserve System altogether and returning to the gold standard. The second has repeatedly criticized the US Federal Reserve. He called for Congress and the government to take control. Also widely known are Trump's ties to Ron Paul, who is the author of a book called End the Fed. In a recent article, he called the Federal Reserve the main source of US social inequality and the cartelization of the global economy. But also such a symbolic gesture. When Trump became president, a few days after his inauguration, he ordered a portrait of Andrew Jackson to be hung in the Oval Office. Yes, that US president who was shot. Who described the main accomplishment of his tenure this way. I killed the bank. That is the central bank. It's more accurate to say that he supposedly defeated the loan sharks. It referred to the liquidation of the Second Bank of the United States, a predecessor to the Federal Reserve, the transfer of its functions, primarily emission, to the Federal Treasury. And in the end, what do we see? We see unambiguously that Trump opposes that part of the elite of the West, which has long ago seized power and does not want to give it, against the owners of money. He openly states that he is against it, against the globalists, against the deep state.
In addition, there has to be a total commitment to dismantling the entire globalist neoconservative establishment. These globalists want to squander all of America's strength, blood, treasure by chasing monsters and phantoms overseas. These forces are doing great damage to America, more damage than Russia and China ever could. Evicting the sick and corrupt establishment is the monumental task for the next president.
Trump's goals are in many ways differ from those in power. And from here it is no surprise that there was an attempt of his assassination.
Trump does something wrong, he'll be assassinated like John F. Kennedy. By accident, some crazy person will just go and kill him in some state.
The idea that Trump was on a hit list reeks of conspiracy, so to speak. But on the other hand, there are so many facts that hint that there was a contract hit. A lot of questions and observations have come up. Well, for example, some people have noticed that Trump has never been put at events with the flag in the background before. The fact is that shooting ranges have a flag weather vane, a wind indicator, for the shooter to make a correction for the wind. Also, how come the sniper was only shooting from under 20 meters? Who let him get so close? There are a lot of questions like that, and they indicate that not everything is as unambiguous as the official position states. Additionally, there are many parallels with the Kennedy assassination. Also a fanatic killer, a lone gunman, also the shooter was killed. As mentioned, Trump, like Kennedy, is going against the money masters. That's the situation, folks.